Shakyamuni Buddha. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me and everyone else on the interwebs for a Sunday service. Before we get started, please join me in invoking our teacher's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Alrighty, so today we're going to be talking about symbolism, and go over some of the symbols we often see in Buddhism and at temples. So I've put them into 3 categories I would speak on today. So we'd be speaking about statues, about symbols, and rituals. So that way it'll make it a little bit easier for me, mostly, and everybody else to kind of go through things. So most of what I'm going to be discussing or defining, I guess, and explaining is going to be more focused on the Mahayana side of Buddhism versus the Theravada and Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism probably has the most symbology out of every other tradition, school of Buddhism. They use symbols quite often for different ceremonies and rituals and daily services. But in most other Mahayana traditions, they share a pretty common small array of symbols. So I'll try to go over some of those today. If I've missed anything that you may have seen or question about or have questions about, feel free to email us or email me through our page on Facebook or through the website. Alrighty, so statues. So statues is our first category today. So statues are pretty common, obviously, in almost every Buddhist temple. The construction of Buddhist statues actually didn't start until several hundred years after the Buddha's death. But all Buddha statues are designed and shaped around the 32 features or characteristics that define a Buddha or symbolize a Buddha. So it just kind of covers different things like eye shape and color of the skin and the hair and just everything else, right? But statues are pretty common, again, in every temple. So usually in most Theravada temples, we'll only see just the one statue of the Buddha and maybe of some of his disciples at their main shrine or in their main shrine hall. Otherwise, we don't typically see other statues. Maybe we'll see statues of the Buddha on his deathbed, so he'd be lying down with his arm up. But Theravada, because Theravada don't believe in all the other celestial Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, so you don't typically see very many statues in Theravada temples, mostly just of Shakyamuni Buddha or Gautama Buddha in the Theravada shrine. Now in Mahayana temples, most temples do have multiple statues at their main shrine. Usually they'll have the one main Buddha statue like we have here behind us, and then they'll typically have 2 bodhisattvas on either side. Depending on the tradition of the temple, we may see either Samantabhadra and Manjushri bodhisattvas on either side, or we'll see Avalokiteshvara and Kshitigarbha on either side. So for us, we have Kshitigarbha, or Earth Store Bodhisattva, and then we have Bodhidharma, which is the Zen patriarch, Buddhist monk. And then usually we'll also have the 2 Deva guardian bodhisattvas towards the back side of our temple. So we have one on either side. Sometimes they'll be inside the temple, sometimes they'll be right at the door or outside. But these Deva Bodhisattvas, Deva guardian Bodhisattvas, are really Dharma protectors, right? And so in most cases, one of the statues, they look pretty fierce, they look mean looking, ready to attack, while the other is a little bit more handsome in style and more kind of calm. So the symbolism behind that, behind the Deva guardian Bodhisattvas, is that the mean looking one kind of deters and scares off the bad people, and then the other one kind of invites everyone in, right? But there are some Buddhist temples that don't have any statues at all, right? They'll maybe have like a symbol or a very small Buddha statue, because statues themselves don't necessarily mean much, right? There's no power or meaning in and of itself. It's there to help give us focus. It's there to help us remind ourselves of the practice of the path that we're on, and to remind us of the characteristics that create that bodhisattva or the Buddha. And so when we see the Buddha statue, right, and we are there doing our service or whatever, right, we are just trying to emulate the characteristics of the Buddha, right? We're trying to emulate and cultivate within ourselves that love and compassion and equanimity and the wisdom that the Buddha and the bodhisattvas have. It's the same thing with all the other bodhisattvas. Most bodhisattvas have a few distinct characteristics that identify them among the other bodhisattvas, right? So Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva is a bodhisattva of compassion. Manjushri Bodhisattva is a bodhisattva of wisdom. So each bodhisattva has kind of a distinct characteristic for themselves. So when we see that statue, it helps bring to mind the characteristics that bodhisattva is about, so that we can develop and create those common qualities within ourselves. But there's no reason to have statues, really. We can still be a Buddhist temple without the statues. The statues are just there to help us, give us a visual guide, a visual kind of help when it comes to helping us recall those qualities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So that's not much more than that for the the statues. So, and I've already discussed some of the qualities, some of the reasons behind it in Bodhisattva statues. So that's that for the statues. Our next category are symbols. So there's many symbols that we see, right? I think one of the most famous and also controversial symbol is the swastika. So the swastika is a very ancient symbol. It predates Buddhism. It predates Christianity and other religions. But it has been used in Christianity. It has been used in Buddhism and Hinduism and Jainism. A lot of the ancient churches, Catholic churches, have used the swastika symbol, right? We see that on a lot of the Buddha statues, either on the chest or on the palms of the Buddhas. It's used in Hindu temples as well. And even in Islam and Jainism, it's been used, right? So it's a pretty universal symbol for a lot of religions. It's even found in like religious sites all across Europe, especially in Germany, and just around Europe in general. So it's portrayed in different ways, right? Sometimes we'll see it with dots or with lines or curved lines, but the swastika itself is a holy symbol. It really just means good fortune or good luck, right? But unfortunately, the Nazis have defiled and used the symbol in a grotesque manner. So, but the actual symbol, the actual correct view of the swastika, you always see it either facing left or right. Both have been used in all the other most religions, but mostly in Buddhism, we'll see it going clockwise. And then a Nazi symbol, unfortunately, is rotated at about 45-degree angle. So we can distinctly see the difference and kind of tell which one's which, because the Nazi one is rotated versus the correct swastika, the undefiled version, is flat, and it's either going clockwise or counterclockwise, but mostly we'll see it, in Buddhism at least, clockwise. I believe in Hinduism, it's used both ways, and each way means something different. But in Buddhism, we use it, or was used, going clockwise, and it just means good fortune, or well-being, good well-being, right? And there's a book, I can't recall the name of the book. There's a book that's written by a Zen Buddhist monk or Buddhist priest. I believe it's called the Buddhist swastika and the Nazi something. But it's a very good read, and it really it gives us a good history and background of the symbol, where it comes from, or where it's been used in the different world religions, how it's been kind of transferred and interused through different cultures around the world, and then of course how the Nazis used it, defiled it, and then just kind of grossed it out. And so now when we see it, unfortunately, right, at least in the Western culture, we see it as just Nazi, as the Nazi swastika, regardless of how it's rotated or not rotated or used, right? We only know of that. And so we typically don't use it anymore in Buddhist temples and Buddhist ceremonies or rituals. It's been mostly disregarded and not used anymore because it betrays, it only, for most Westerners, it only portrays the Nazi swastika. But it's still used in other cultures around the world, especially India for Hinduism, and other East Asian countries. They still use it for symbols on the Buddhas and other statues. So, so don't get scared. Don't be scared of it, right? I believe in our dining hall and some of the banners we have hanging does have the swastika on there, and of course we get many questions about it all the time. But it's definitely not a Nazi symbol. They've defiled it, they've grossed it out, but it really is a beautiful symbol, which represents beautiful things. So it will probably take many, many other generations, probably hundreds of years, before we can kind of get rid of the superficial, not superficial, but get rid of the negative connotation that it has. It'll always have a negative connotation, regardless of what year we're in or however long we kind of let it go, because it represents, the Nazi symbol represents something so defiled and gross. We'll never totally get rid of it, but hopefully one day we'll get to a point where we won't see it as the Nazi symbol. So, let's see. The next symbol that we have will be, let's see, so the next symbol is the Dharma wheel, or the Dharma chakra. The Dharma wheel is probably the most used symbol, and we'll probably see it at least once on something somewhere at every temple. And for us, we have it like on our chant books. This is the Dharma wheel. So the Dharma wheel will always have the 8 spokes on it, which represent the 8-fold path. You'll typically see it either on statues. Sometimes you'll see it on the palms of Buddha statues, or on their chest. a lot of time on most temples, it's also the symbol that's on top of the actual temple, like on the roof. And I think it's like the official Buddhist symbol as well. When we see it like on maps or on grave sites or anything. So it also represents a lot of other teachings depending on the design of it. So some designs are pretty just basic and pretty flat. You'll see the 8 spokes, which represent the Eightfold Path. Sometimes we'll see 4 other ones in the inside of the wheel, which represents the Four Noble Truths. And then a kind of either a jeweled symbol or maybe a lotus symbol in the middle, which represents the wisdom and the enlightenment of the path, eventual path. But it is a beautiful symbol. It's probably one of my favorite symbols personally. We just installed the ornaments for our new shrine last weekend, and one of the ornaments again is a Dharma wheel, which is on the center on our roof. So hopefully in the future, when everybody is able to come back and visit us at the temple, we'll see those beautiful adornments that's on there. And another symbol, again, alongside with the Dharma wheel, is a lotus flower. So a lotus flower isn't an official Buddhist symbol, but it's used quite often because the lotus flower itself represents a lot. Generally speaking, the lotus flower represents wisdom or insight. So we'll see it used quite a bit as an example in some of the sutras, as a parable in some of the sutras. Then we have the actual Lotus Sutra, right? The Lotus Flower Sutra. So the lotus itself, because the way it grows, right? It comes from mud, so it comes from like dirty water, dirty mud, and it kind of escapes that until it gets to the surface of the water and it blooms without any mud or dirt on it. So that represents, so we've used that in teachings to mean that we've escaped or trying to escape our defiled mind, right? We're escaping our mind that is full of ignorance, greed, and anger, and we escape that and finally bloom into enlightenment, bloom into the wisdom of the path. So it really means more on the back end of the flower versus what the flower is itself. But it's still used quite often to represent wisdom, to represent insight. So we don't typically see it on statues or any kind of like masonry or anything, but the flower itself represents the meaning behind it, I guess. And that's, I'm trying to think of what other symbols we may have around the temple, but that's pretty much the main symbols you'll see at Mahayana temples. We also may see the dragons, and I think that's the dragons another thing I want to kind of cover. Like so in our ornaments, for instance, on the roof of our new shrine, we have the dragons kind of looking inward. And the dragons themselves are kind of a adapted version of other beings that came from India. So I don't recall in my research or study where dragons are necessarily mentioned in the earlier teachings of the Buddha, in the earlier sutras. We see like the Gandharvas and the Kimnaras kind of creatures, but dragons themselves only pop up in sutras when it came to China. So Chinese Buddhism may have added it in, and so it became a symbol at temples. But they themselves, the dragons themselves, are kind of also represented as pretty much the same way like the Deva guardian bodhisattvas are. They're Dharma protectors. So they're there to protect the temple, they're there to protect the Dharma, and to protect the Sangha as a whole. But they don't have from what I can recall and research, they're simply just kind of representations of protectors of the Sangha, protectors of the grounds. But we only see them as ornaments on temples, on the temple roofs, as ornaments on temple roofs, or even maybe on stairwells, staircases, and perhaps on temple gates. So some temples have these huge gates in the front that we will eventually have as well, hopefully. But on the temple gates also we'll see representations of dragons kind of hovering over as protectors of the grounds and of the Sangha. So the last category here is rituals. So rituals, we have a lot of rituals in Buddhism, and they all have a meaning or represent something. So everything that we do in a temple, everything that we do during a service or a ceremony has a meaning. So we don't do anything just for the heck of doing it. There's always a reason behind it. There's always a meaning of why we do things. So some of the first things we see when we start a service, for instance, is bowing and offering of incense, or any offerings in general. So the bowing, when we're bowing for the most part, we're bowing 3 times. So we're bowing to the 3 jewels, or the triple gem, right, which is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So we're bowing to our fundamental teacher, the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. We're bowing to his wisdom and his gratitude for giving us the teachings. We're bowing to the Dharma, so we're bowing to the teachings themselves, right? And then we're bowing to the Sangha, which is the community of practitioners. So it's not something that we're doing in submission to the Buddha. We're not doing it as an act of worship. We're doing it to show humility and gratitude to the teachings, to the Buddha, to the Sangha, to everyone that's around us, that helps us with our practice, right? Whether it's the monks and nuns or just the lay members. We're basically just giving thanks in a way. And then we offer incense. We also offer fruits. Sometimes we'll see fruits on the altar. I don't know if you can see any fruits behind me. We offer fruits, water, and flowers. Of all the rituals that temples do now, offerings is one of the only rituals that were also done during the Buddha's time as well. So whenever people came and visited the Buddha, they would always offer flowers, fruits, food, incense, and clean water or new robes, right? Those are kind of the typical offerings we'd give to the monastics. So we've continued that practice to today. But I'll touch base specifically on the incense. So the incense, whenever we offer incense, we're doing it for multiple reasons. One, it's an offering to the Buddha or to the Bodhisattva. So each statue has a small incense censer in front of it, so we offer them the incense. And the incense themselves represents the Dharma, represents the teachings, right? The teachings in the Dharma is beautiful and pretty, just like the fragrance. The fragrance is pleasing. It smells good, it's nice, but at the same time it's also impermanent because the incense will, burn out and die out. So it teaches us that even though the teachings, the Dharma is beautiful, it too is also impermanent because we can use the teachings. We only need the teachings until we've attained enlightenment, and once we've attained enlightenment, we no longer need the teaching. Or but it also shows us that everything that's beautiful, everything that's pretty, everything that we want is also impermanent, because it'll eventually age or get sick, or it'll die, right? If it's a person, even things, even good things, even technology, even our houses, our cars, things um, are working now, and they're beautiful and they're nice and we want them, but eventually they too will also cease to exist eventually. So it reminds us that even the pretty things eventually have an expiration date, basically, and it too will die out. So when we burn the incense, it's also a reminder that the Dharma is pretty, things in the world are pretty, but they too will cease to exist. So it's mostly a teaching and a reminder of impermanence. And then lastly is about some of the instruments. So a lot of the instruments, well, it's not a lot, but the main instruments we have at the temple are the big bell that we strike, the motak, which is the wood drum thing, I don't know how to explain it, and then the inking bell, which is a small bell that we use at the beginning and at the end of the ceremony. A lot of temples will also have the very large drum and the large bell, which we'll have and move to our new shrine eventually. But these are instruments that are used in chanting to help us really keep in sync with each other. It works kind of like a choir or orchestra conductors, right? It kind of keeps you in line, keeps you on point, keeps you in tempo with everyone else to kind of stay together and in sync when we are chanting. The motak itself, most of them will look pretty much the same, have the same basic shape. But early motaks, when they were made, and they are a Chinese invention of the motak. The motak is, and it's made almost in the shape as a fish. And the story behind that is because there was a monk way back in the day that was kind of lazy and didn't really study or practice much, right? He was just kind of lounging around. But then he would always be sleeping, right? He would always be sleeping when the monks were chanting or meditating. And so when he passed away and died, he was reborn as a fish. And fish, their eyes are always open, so they're always awake. And so an enlightened monk who saw that and knew that this fish was a monk in a past life, then created the motak, kind of a representation of him, to help remind other monks and nuns to be diligent and stay awake in their practice. So they use it during the chanting to help us stay awake, but also to help us keep in sync when we're chanting and speaking during the chanting services. But that is mostly everything that I wanted to discuss. I think I've mostly gone over all the major stuff that we would have at a temple. Again, if I've missed anything, or if you have any questions about anything that I did not discuss, feel free to send us an email or a comment. Let us know, and I'll try to answer you and go over any definitions or questions or concerns you may have. But that is it for my discussion today on symbolism, or some of the symbols at least. So we will now go to our chanting service. We'll do our general chanting. Again, if you have our book, please join us in our book. If not, you can download the chants from our website. So we'll go ahead and transfer the merit. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment. Body, speech, and mind in perfect oneness, I send my heart along with the sound of the bell. May the hearers awake from forgetfulness and transcend all anxiety and sorrow. Listen, listen, this wonderful sound brings me back to my true home. In gratitude we offer this incense to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas throughout space, and may it be fragrant as earth herself, reflecting our careful efforts, wholehearted mindfulness, and the fruit of understanding slowly ripen. May we and all beings be companions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. May we awaken from forgetfulness and realize our true home. The incense in the censer now is burning, all the Dharma realm in every auspicious cloud appearing, our sincere intention thus fulfilled, as all Buddhas now show their perfect body homage to the hymn. Cloud canopy Bodhisattva and great Bodhisattva. Homage to the eternally abiding Buddhas, the supreme Dharma and sagely Sangha. Homage to the fundamental teacher Shakyamuni Buddha, Maitreya, honor future Buddha, Manjushri, great wisdom Bodhisattva, universal great conduct Bodhisattva, all Dharma Deva guarding Bodhisattvas and Magic Mountain assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. compassion mantra with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes are on you runs like this. Namo Ratnajaya Namo Avalokiteshvaraya Bodhisattva Mahasarvaya Mahakarunikaya Om Savaravati Sodana Sasya Namaskitva Namadaryam Shvaralantava Namo Nilakanta Shri Mahabhata Shami Sarvadata Shubhamashiyam Sarvasattva Namo Vanamo Bhagama Bhate Tutaryata Om Avaloka Lokati Kalati Hishi Bodhisattva Sabo Sabo Mara Mara Mahi Mahi Vidayo Goro Gamyan Doro Doro Bhashati Mahabhashati Dara Dara Divi Vishwaraya Jana Jana Maha Modhela Heya Hishina Shina Hala Shimbala Shari Basha Basan Parashaya Holo Praholo Holo Shri Sara Sara Siri Siri Soro Soro Bodhaya 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 Maitreya Sadrisharana Vayamani Swaha Sitaya Swaha Maha Sitaya Swaha Yayeshwaraya Swaha Nilakanti Swaha Pranila Swaha Shisemahukaya Swaha Sarva Hasaya Swaha Chakra Hasaya Swaha Padma Keshaya Swaha Nilakantam Pantalaya Araya Swaha Namo Ratnatrayaya Namo Arya Avalokiteshvaraya Swaha Yanto Mandrapadaya Swaha. The Dharma body is bringing morning light in concentration. My heart is at peace, a half smile is worn on my lips. It's a new day and I vow to go through it in mindfulness. The sun of wisdom has risen, shining in every direction. Sangha diligently bring your mind into meditation. Namo Shakyamuni Buddhaya Namo Shakyamuni Buddhaya Namo Shakyamuni Buddhaya. The one who bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature empty. Therefore the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. Practice center is a net of Indra reflecting all Buddhas everywhere as my own person reflects in all Buddhas, whom with my whole life I go for refuge. Offering light in the 10 directions, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to whom we bow in gratitude. Teaching and living the way of awareness in the very midst of suffering and confusion. Shakyamuni Buddha, the awakened one, to bow in gratitude. Cutting through ignorance, awakening our hearts and our minds. Manjushri, the Bodhisattva, great understanding, to whom we bow in gratitude. Working mindfully, working joyfully for the sake of all beings. Samanta Bhadra, the Bodhisattva, great action, to whom we bow in gratitude. Responding to suffering, serving beings in countless ways. Avalokiteshvara, the Buddhist, of great compassion, to whom we bow in gratitude. Seed of awakening and loving kindness in children, sprouts, and all beings. Maitreya, the Buddha, to be born, we bow in gratitude. Showing the way fearlessly and compassionately, the stream of all our ancestral teachers, to whom we bow in gratitude. The Dharma is deep and lovely, we now have a chance to see Prajnaparamita, the Bodhisattva Avalokita, while moving in the discourse of perfect understanding, shed light on the five skandhas and equally empty. After this penetration, he overcame ill being. Thus in Shariputra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form. The same is true with feelings, perception, mental functions, and consciousness. Thus in Shariputra, all dharmas are marked with emptiness. They are neither produced nor destroyed. It neither increasing nor decreasing, therefore in emptiness there is neither form nor feelings. So formations or consciousness, no eye or ear or nose or tongue nor body or mind, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind, elements, no interdependent origins, and no extinction of them, no ill-being, no cause of ill-being, no end of ill-being, no understanding, no attainment, because there is no attainment. The Bodhisattvas grounded in perfect understanding, goals for their minds having no obstacles, they overcome fear, liberating themselves forever from illusion and realizing perfect. All Buddhas in the past, present, and future arrive at full right and universal enlightenment. Therefore one should know that perfect understanding is the highest mantra, the unequal mantra, being the incorruptible truth. The mantra of Prajnaparamita should therefore be proclaimed. Gate gate parak Rasam gate bodhi swaha, gate gate para, gate para sam gate bodhi swaha, gate gate para, gate para sam gate bodhi swaha. We invoke your name, Avalokiteshvara. We aspire to learn your way of listening in order to help relieve the suffering in the world. You know how to listen in order to understand. We invoke your name, listening with all our attention and open-heartedness. We will sit and listen without any prejudice. We will sit and listen without judging or reacting. Then listen in order to understand. We will sit and listen so attentively that we will be able to hear what the person is saying and also what is being left unsaid. We know that just by listening deeply we already alleviate a great deal of pain in the other person. We invoke your name, Manjushri. We aspire to learn your way, which is to be still and to look deeply into the heart of things and into the hearts of people. With all our attention and open-heartedness, we will look with unprejudiced eyes. We will look without judging or reacting. We will look deeply so that we will be able to see and understand the roots of suffering through the impermanent and selfless nature of all that is. We will practice your way of using the sword of understanding to cut through the bonds of suffering, thus freeing ourselves and other species. We invoke your name, Samantabhadra. We aspire to practice your vow to act with the eyes and heart of compassion, to bring joy to one person in the morning and to ease the pain of in the afternoon. We know that the happiness of others is our own happiness, and we aspire to practice joy on the service. We know that every word, every look, every action, and every smile can bring happiness to others. If we practice wholeheartedly, we ourselves may become an inexhaustible source of peace and joy for our loved ones and for all species. We invoke your name, Kshitigarbha. We aspire to learn your way of being present where there is darkness, suffering, oppression, and despair, so we can bring light, hope, relief, and liberation. We are determined not to forget about or abandon those in desperate situations. We will do our best to establish contact with those who cannot find a way out of their suffering, those whose cries for help, justice, equality, and human rights are not being heard. We know hell can be found in many places on earth. We will do our best not to contribute to creating we will practice in order to realize the qualities of perseverance and stability, so that like the earth we can always be supportive and faithful to those in need. I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of understanding and of love. I take refuge in the Sangha, community that lives in harmony and awareness. Dwelling in the refuge of Buddha, I clearly see the path of light and beauty in the world. Dwelling in the refuge of Dharma, I learn to open many doors on the path of transformation. Dwelling in the refuge of Sangha, shining light that supports me, keeping my practice free of obstruction. Taking refuge in the Buddha, in myself I aspire to help all people recognize their weakened nature, realizing the mind of love. Taking refuge in the Dharma, in myself aspire to help all people fully master the ways of practice and walk together on the path of liberation. Taking refuge in the Sangha, in myself aspire to help all people build fourfold communities to embrace all beings and support their transformation. Reciting the sutras, practicing the way of awareness gives rise to benefits without limit. We vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, and numerous beings who give guidance, support along the path. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. I also wanted to announce that on August 30th, it's a Sunday at 10 a.m., we will be virtually celebrating Ulaanbaatar, or Ancestors Day or Parents Day. So please join us on August 30th as we celebrate Ulaanbaatar. Again, that will be virtual. We can find the details and the link either on our website or on Facebook. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.